Okay, welcome. My name is Jim McCafferty. I am the host for this CrimCon section. Welcome to CrimCon 2020. This is going to be the first panel for CrimCon 2020 on the stream number 3. So it's very exciting. We're going to be proceeding in order of the program, and each presenter will have about 10 minutes, and I'm going to mute everybody at 10 minutes on the dot, just to make sure that everybody has enough time. For those of you that are in the audience, we're going to take questions, type them into the Q&A box. It's not possible that we're going to get to all questions, but we're going to hold off on everything until the very end. And I'll filter some of those questions and ask them at the end. So I'm going to yield the floor to the group of researchers from Southeastern Louisiana University. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. The Effects of Sociocultural Influence on Body Satisfaction by Landon, Benoit, Claire Leblanc, Micah Brown, Lynzeryus, Railey, and Kadir Felton. The purpose of this research is to further understand the complex relationship between sociocultural influences and body dissatisfaction. This research is significant because it aids in discerning possible sociocultural factors which contribute to prominent issues. Furthermore, this research can contribute to an increased understanding of the magnitude social forces engaged in our lives, such as ideal body shape and weight, closely correlated with physical attractiveness.
We evaluated the following hypotheses. Number 1, students who experience more negative comments about their body have a lower sense of satisfaction with their body. Secondly, students that identify as female report having a lower body satisfaction than non-female students. Third, students that spend more time on social media tend to have a lower sense of satisfaction with their body. Fourth, students that recognize themselves as having a mesomorph body type report the highest sense of body satisfaction. Lastly, individuals with a higher BMI will have a lower sense of satisfaction with their body.
So for this study, we used a convenient sample. We surveyed 52 students enrolled at Southeastern. We surveyed our respondents during the months of October and November 2020, and given the hiccups in normal surveying due to COVID, we had to conduct our survey online. So in order to do that, we recorded and measured our responses through Google Forms. So we had about 13 variables, which included things like the respondent's age in years, their self-reported body type, whether it's ectomorph, mesomorph, or endomorph, and whether they regularly experience stress, depression, or anxiety. And in order to determine things like the student's body satisfaction, we asked like a scale questions such as how satisfied are you with your height or your weight? And in order to compare our groups, we used the Pearson correlation coefficient and one-way ANOVA test.
Okay, so for our first hypothesis, we determined that with a p-value of 0.004 and the alpha level set at 0.05, we have sufficient evidence to conclude that negative body-related criticisms do decrease body satisfaction among Southeastern students. Therefore, we retain this hypothesis and reject the null hypothesis. Moreover, we observed a weak to moderate positive correlation, as you can see in the scatter plot, between body satisfaction and compliments and criticisms. So with every 1 unit increase, there's a 1/2 unit increase in body satisfaction. Now for hypothesis 2, we found that with a p-value of 0.41 and the alpha level set at 0.05, we have insufficient evidence to conclude that students who identified as female report having a lower body satisfaction than non-female students. As indicated by the population pyramid, as you can see here, female students who reported having an increased body satisfaction with a mean of around 2 compared to non-female students with a mean of around 0.033. Therefore, this hypothesis was rejected and the null hypothesis was retained. Now for hypothesis 3, we found that with the p-value at 0.311 and the alpha level set at 0.05, we have insufficient evidence to conclude that students who spend more time on social media report having a lower sense of body satisfaction. Therefore, we reject this hypothesis and retain the null. However, even though we do not have a statistically significant finding, the scatter plot does illustrate the general trend that we have seen in the literature. So with a larger sample size, we may be able to see that trend and have it statistically significant. Now for hypothesis 4, we found that according to the data, there is a statistically significant difference between body type and body satisfaction. Therefore, we retained this hypothesis and rejected the null hypothesis. A post-hoc Tukey test did reveal that those who identified as having a mesomorph body type also reported statistically significant greater body satisfaction with a p-value of around 0.000 compared to those who identified as having an endomorph body type. However, there was not a statistically significant difference between those who identified with a mesomorph body type and those who identified with an ectomorph body type, with a p-value of about 0.035. Therefore, the individuals who identified as having a mesomorph or ectomorph body type are content with their body. Now for hypothesis 5, we found that with the p-value at 0.001 and the alpha level set at 0.05, we have sufficient evidence to conclude that individuals with increased BMI values also report having decreased body satisfaction. Moreover, we see in the scatter plot that there is a weak to moderate negative correlation. What this essentially means is that as BMI increases, body satisfaction decreases. Therefore, we retain this hypothesis and reject the null hypothesis.
Our findings suggest that students who receive less remarks and criticisms, have a lower body mass index, and identify as a mesomorph body type report having the highest sense of body satisfaction. We determine remarks and criticisms seem to be the most important variable in determining one's body satisfaction. This is supported by our findings as well as the literature. Previous research supports our findings that an individual's body mass index is an important variable in determining one's satisfaction with their body. Though previous research found a significant relationship between media exposure and poor body image, our findings did not support this. We believe one explanation to our findings is that social agents, including remarks and criticisms from families and peers, will affect one's body satisfaction level. Additionally, individuals may internalize these attitudes and beliefs about their appearance, causing lower body satisfaction.
In summary, there were several limitations to our study. First, a convenient sample was used because it was most easily accessible to the team coupled with the challenges of COVID. Second, the sample consisted primarily of college students, so that made it harder to generalize the inferences for larger populations. Third, the content of the media was not assessed. The form of media and platforms in social media, however, were. Thus, this would not permit the elucidation of the magnitude of relationships between media and body dissatisfaction. Fourth, the study does not allow for causal inferences due to the methods used. A longitudinal approach with a representative sample may clarify the directionality of the relationship between sociocultural influences and body dissatisfaction. Furthermore, an instrument which assesses the content of the media consumed could also give insight into the magnitude and directionality of each variable. While engaged in this study, we've learned that there are a myriad of influences which can impact body satisfaction. These influences can be a result of individual peer, family, and social media exposure, or even another variable that we just didn't have time to consider.
Okay, this is our study, the effect of sociocultural influences on body satisfaction. It was presented by myself, Landon Benoit, Claire Leblanc, Micah Brown, Lynzeryus Railey, and Kadir Felton. We are from Southeastern Louisiana University, and thank you for having us, CrimCon 2020.
Thank you to the group from Southeastern Louisiana University. I really appreciate it. You were the inaugural group to go for CrimCon 2020. So, you know, rock on, all right?
Thank you.
So, Landon, if you would unshare your screen, we're going to invite Brittany up and give Brittany Hood the floor now.
Can you guys see it?
We can.
Awesome. Okay. Let me start my timer or I will never finish in time. Okay. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. Today I'm presenting part of my dissertation in one of my undergraduate students from Indiana University is also in here. Her name is Samantha Johnson. And today we're actually going to be talking about the effect of Medicaid in service provider treatment decisions for individuals who are criminal justice involved and have serious mental illness within the community. So what is the problem? Historically, we know that there's a disproportionate representation of individuals who have serious mental illness, so schizophrenia, major depression, and bipolar disorder within the criminal justice system at all points. And when individuals are incarcerated, they traditionally don't experience any treatment, or the treatment that is provided while incarcerated is not appropriate to address social and mental health needs. So we find that individuals leave incarceration that have SMI with those unaddressed needs, and they have a disproportionately high recidivism rate compared to other populations. So then they're forced to, if they choose to decide to get treatment, to find that treatment in the community. Now, unfortunately, since the inception of community mental health centers following the closure of state mental health hospitals in the United States, treatment is just generally not available or insufficient for individuals in the community. And this is primarily due to funding. So the question then becomes, how do community mental health service providers make treatment decisions in order to address this disproportionately high recidivism rate for this population? And so this brings me to the dissertation study, which was completed in the spring. The study, the overarching question was, how do these community mental health center service providers make these decisions, but how are the organizational variables influencing their decision making? So this brings me to 4 overarching research questions, which were how an organization's goals, budget, policies, as well as law influence an employee's perception of their treatment options for this population. Now, given time, I will only do a brief review of the relevant literature. And so in relation to decision-making and organizations, what we find is the extent to which individuals work together within an organization and between organizations on the same page with the same goals in mind, that's organizational coupling, that influences decision-making, as well as goals, policy, size, and budget of an organization, healthcare law when we're specifically talking about this question, as well as to what extent service providers are overwhelmed with their caseload and to what extent they have discretion or autonomy. So how are these data collected? Using proposive and snowball sampling, I did collect a survey, or I did administer surveys with 61 service providers, which is about 70% in 70% of community mental health centers in Indiana. In order to be included in the study, the individual had to have a direct caseload. And so they could have been an administrator as long as they had at least one person on their caseload with criminal justice involvement, as well as one of those 3 diagnoses. So who did we talk to? Primarily white females of non-Hispanic heritage with master's levels degrees. And what did their caseloads look like? What was the difficulty of their caseload? So the main takeaway here is that most, over 90% of individuals on caseloads with criminal justice involvement had co-occurring disorders. So not only did they have one of the 3 aforementioned disorders, but they also had traditionally substance abuse disorder or anxiety or PTSD from a prior trauma. So this makes those caseloads significantly more difficult to treat. So what were the findings as they relate to Medicaid? Well, the findings as they relate to the dissertation as a whole, the largest finding was that Medicaid is influencing or driving a lot of these barriers to treatment decisions. And so this can really be epitomized by this quote from service provider 131, who said, you know, insurance runs the world, right? And so when I talk about these results, I want to talk about them in relation to, were they affected by Medicaid? Were organizational goals? Not really, but kind of, and I'll explain why. Budget policies and law, yes, Medicaid did affect those and therefore affected treatment decisions. So as I said, goals, overall goals were not perceived to be a barrier to treatment, but when the data were dug into deeper, there were 2 goals that individuals had for the future that they weren't able to get buy-in from their client, from the organization or their coworkers at the time. And the one I want to talk about here is the harm reduction approach. And in short, this essentially says that recovery from substance abuse is not always, abstinence is not always possible or not always ideal for an individual. And so what we need are needle exchange programs, places that you can inject drugs safely, and you should be able to allow individuals to use drugs as long as they're not as harmful as other drugs. And so this can be seen in this quote here. How do you handle a patient who's continuing to use cannabis in a program? Well, if they're using it to use less heroin, then you just say, yeah, smoke as much weed as you want. Just try not to use heroin because we don't want you to die. The reason why I say this is really indirect is because I do not perceive Medicaid to be on board with providing treatment such as this. And so in the long run, I think this is the public health direction we will be going in the following decades. And so there'll be issues with Medicaid. So budget was one of the main variables that were affected by Medicaid. And so just not enough funding in general, but primarily because Medicaid does not, and you'll see this on the next slide, does not provide enough funding to the state. And the funding that they do provide is rather insufficient. And so what you see here is that 85% of service providers said that Medicaid had some factor or was a driving factor in budget related restrictions. I'm going to skip this quote just so I can skip to some of the types of Medicaid challenges. So as I said, low reimbursement rates. So based on what they're providing, the reimbursement rates are really, really low, particularly compared to other insurance outlets. Limited Medicaid funding specifically from the state. And then the requirements to accept Medicaid funding are disproportionate in that the requirements are so extreme in order to receive such minimal reimbursement rates. So this takes us to policy. Medicaid law affects organizational policies that then influence treatment decisions. And this was found in 20% of the interviews. Almost 12% of individuals, and this was the primary issue, once an individual is reincarcerated, so these individuals are on probation, parole, house arrest, work release programs, once they're reincarcerated, Medicaid stops and while they're in jail, and then they cannot reinitiate Medicaid until they've been released. And this process requires them to start completely over. And so the continuity of care, it's not continuous because an individual could take 3 to 6 months to reinitiate everything that they need, particularly if they have a substance abuse issue. And again, the criteria for reporting those policies are they are derived from Medicaid.
Brittany, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. And the final variable here, healthcare related law. In each of these variables, I asked what was the greatest law related challenge, budget related challenge, policy related challenge, et cetera. And healthcare law was the greatest law related challenge. Almost 60% of individuals said so. And the quote that I choose to talk about here is, so the biggest law related challenge is that the law won't stay out of my clinical practice. And so what we see is, and I can come back to these in light of time, but what we see is Medicaid specific laws because of low reimbursement costs. And so there's this cycle. Law influences budget, all influence, and policy, all influenced by Medicaid. One of the main problems is there's this licensure restriction where individuals that are a licensed clinical social worker are able to accept Medicaid, but those that are licensed mental health care workers are not able to accept Medicaid. However, the LMHCs have more mental health related training, and these are pretty much equivalent degrees. HIPAA was also another issue, and I also skipped this one. Providing mental health care across state lines was an issue around the border of the state. So this takes us to a couple policy implications. We need to review the Medicaid reimbursement for MRO treatment, which is for substance abuse. Substance abuse and mental illness go hand in hand. We also need to review the legislative in Indiana Medicaid funding for community mental health centers. I'm going to skip the limitations, and here there is a QR code if you're interested in the full dissertation, and there will be an article coming from the Medicaid the Medicaid portion as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brittany. I appreciate it. There's a question for you, and if we have time at the end, we're going to come back and answer that.
Okay, thank you.
So if you would unshare your screen, we're going to give the floor to the next presentation, which is the effects of refugees on the public's threat perceptions to security. And Halil, were you able to get the Zoom to work for you?
Okay, sure. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Sorry, a couple of things is going on in this morning, so I think.
All right, I will start your clock in a second here, Halil.
Okay, and you see my PowerPoints, I think.
We do.
Okay, this topic is security threat perceptions of Turkish public towards Syrians. As many people know, there are lots of Syrians are living in Turkey right now, and this is actually a refugee issue is a very subtopic of the migration. And today there are thousands of millions of migrants are leaving their countries because of the civil war and because of the economic conditions. But when these migrants, leave their countries and arrive to destination countries, they are forming and creating new immigrant communities in the destination countries. So this one is actually, when they create new migrant communities, an important policy issue, an important research issue is the relationship between the local people and this new migrant group. And there are lots of research are going on about the perceptions of local people towards migrants. And generally, the research states that there is a very negative opinions towards the migrants by the actually local people. There are several theories related to that one. One of them is the subcultural diversity. Say that people have widespread feelings of insecurity toward others, looking or acting differently. Another theory is the criminal threat theory. It says that dominant groups see minorities as a crime-prone creatures, thereby perceiving them as a threat to public order and safety. We use also two important concepts related to integrated threat theory. It says, for example, one of them is the realistic threats. There is going to be a material competition between the migrant group as well as the local population. This is realistic threats, and symbolic threats say that local population or the migrant groups try to protect values, norms, and belief systems of each other, and so there is going to be a kind of conflict. So our study actually related to Syrian refugees, and we look at first examine to what extent Turkish public's security threat perceptions exist among the Turkish people towards the Syrian refugees. As we know, there are since 2011, when the Arab Springs protest starts, in Turkey, there are 3.6 million Syrian refugees are living right now, and this actually made Turkey the largest refugee hosting country. They are generally living in city centers, and some of them, a minor percentage of them, are living in the actually refugee camps. And this creates a kind of problem, actually negative, increased negative perceptions toward the Syrian refugees, actually. And another thing is, in this research, we try to explore whether or not, to what extent people have a negative perceptions, and also we try to understand a group of variables impact on these perceptions. One of them is the individual level perceptions. The other one is the there are some city variables, and we try to understand these city level factors on people's perceptions, actually. And in terms of refugees, there are actually some positive and negative factors, actually, that moderate these perceptions. The positive factors might be because refugees are coming to Turkey because of humanitarian reasons, and they share the same religion with the Turkish public. These might be positive impacts, but there are also some negative impacts. For example, harming society's value and culture system, and as well as there are some tensions between Syrian and local people in Turkey. And the other one is, especially Syrian refugees, has a serious impacts on the unemployment rates, on economy, actually. So because of this, local people's perceptions might be negative because of these reasons. So I shortly summarized our methods. We used as convenience sampling in order to understand these perceptions. And one of our colleagues actually shared the survey, shared the questionnaire with the surveymonkey.com. And finally, we collected data, and we have 745 participants from 29 different cities. And our major dependent variables, criminal threat, we measured this variable with 4 questions based on a Likert scale. And economic threat, we measured this variable with 3 questions based on a Likert scale. And cultural threat, we measured this variable based on a dummy category question. And as I said, there are 14 different independent variables. Some of these independent variables are individual level, and 4 independent variables are city level variables. And we conducted multivariate and logistic regression models in order to understand people's perceptions towards Syrians. So here are the descriptive statistics of our dependent variables and independent variables. As we see, the mean is here quite high. There is a serious threat perceptions. It is very high, especially economic threat is quite high toward Syrians. And our independent variables, relational discomfort, we ask questions, for example, whether or not they are comfortable with Syrians in their communications. And we also ask questions, for example, how frequently do they encounter with Syrians in neighborhoods and also in cities. We use this as 2 different variables. We measure religiosity as 3 category variable, and more religious, less religious, and to the more religious. And in terms of age, 5 category variable, and marital status, it is measured as two categories, married or not married, ethnicity.
Halil, you have
as,
2 minutes. Halil, you have
minutes?
2 minutes to go. Yes, 2 minutes.
Okay, just I am gonna summarize the results then. So here, the significant variable is the most significant one, the relational discomfort. That means when the Turkish citizens has a high relational discomfort, this actually increase the all types of threat, criminal threat, economic threat, and cultural threat. The second important variable is here actually sirens encounters in neighborhood. When the people frequently encounter sirens, it is gonna be positive impact on all three types of threats. So increase the criminal threat and economic threat, cultural threat perceptions. Religiosity is also more religious people have more threat perceptions towards sirens, criminal threat and cultural threat. In terms of city level variables, we see that percent, especially unemployment, where the cities where the unemployment is very high, people generally have more criminal threat and more cultural threat. I think these are the all important findings, and overall I can say that there is a high threat perceptions among the Turkish public towards sirens right now, and especially uncomfortable feelings and frequent encounters and religiosity are the important factors that increase the threat perceptions towards sirens. I think that's all. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Halil.
listening and paying attention to me. Thank you again.
Thank you. And thank your team there. If you would unshare your screen, we're going to give the floor now to April for the last presentation for this panel. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A.
Okay.
Okay, April.
Okay. Give me 1 second here. Ugh, sorry. Okay, it's doing what it wants. Fantastic. Okay, perfect. Can everybody see that? Is it okay? Oh,
I can
boy.
see it.
Okay.
I can see it, April.
All right, cool, perfect. Alrighty, I'll go ahead and get started. So my name is April Carrillo, or April Carrillo. I am a 4th year PhD student at Old Dominion University and a doctoral candidate. I'll be talking to you today about the CS in Men in Dresses, the role of community concerning trans folks' perception of police officers. So before I get started, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. Where I particularly live, I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional land of the Powhatan people. And although land acknowledgements are a good step towards the decolonization process, it should not be the last step. So just some terminology so we're all on the same page. LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning. Folks with an X, as you've seen on the first slide, is just a more inclusive term of, like, instead of the LK, it's for people with a non-normative sexual orientation or gender identity. Transgender are people, is an umbrella term, people whose gender identity or gender expression differs from what's typically associated from the sex they were assigned at birth, while trans is shorthand to include everyone, such as gender fluid, genderqueer, and non-binary folks. Particularly those last two come from the GLAAD Media Reference Guide, which is a great resource for this terminology. So what are the experiences of trans folks with the criminal legal system, particularly with law enforcement? It's not good. Studies have repeatedly shown that trans folks have a higher rate of physical violence, harassment, and even sexual assault when they interact with police, particularly after the police find out that they are trans somehow, either by either by a difference between their ID and their presentation, or by asking them certain things, or by even the person just saying, hey, these are my name and pronouns, those sorts of things. In a national representative study of 27,000 trans folks, it's found that 57% only felt that they were sometimes or never treated with respect by police, while 58%, a large majority, argued that they were even uncomfortable in asking for help from the police because of these instances. This escalates, especially if you are a trans woman of color, as you face 4 times the likelihood than your cisgender white counterparts to face a higher rates of police violence, especially if you're Black or Indigenous. This relationship between police and trans women of color actually has a name called walking while trans. It describes when police stereotype trans women as sex workers or drug dealers because they're up to no good because they're existing in public space. This is even backed up by laws such as manifesting prostitution laws, which state that you can arrest somebody in 8 states because they look like they're about to commit sex work, not that any sex work has actually been committed. And these have been used and leveraged against trans women of color. I already alluded to the hesitancy to calling 911, and particularly when it comes to interpersonal violence and then the mistreatment that comes after that. So trans people in relationships that are in trouble or they're facing violence in the home, they'll call 911, they'll call police, and they're met with slurs, misuse of pronouns, misgendering, and oftentimes they're arrested or accused of being the wrongdoer in these situations. So again, it's that hesitancy. Not only personal experience, but experiences of other people have led to a general distrust of police. It's not only the experience, the one-on-one experiences, but also knowing about other people's experiences in certain areas or just with police in general makes trans folks hesitant into either calling or interacting with law enforcement. And this has been found in adults as well as youth. The gaps in criminological literature are enormous. And it's not until the last 10 years that we've been even publishing in the field about these sorts of issues. And most of the information that I've been giving you about the experiences of trans folks in the police has actually been from nonprofits or gray literature, non-peer-reviewed literature, because those are the folks who are doing this work, right? So we've really been letting these folks down in terms of what their actual experiences are. The current study, it's from my dissertation. It's an in-depth qualitative interview study of 44 different folks with an average age of 35. I had 34% people of color, 66% white, just had to be over 18, live in Virginia, and be trans and identify as trans. I had a 55% trans women, 23% trans men, and 23% non-binary and genderqueer folks. My specific questions that I'm going to focus on from the broader interview guide are, would you feel comfortable calling the police if you ever needed anything? And how do you think the police perceive trans folks? Notably, I'm using narratives of folks who are not only have personal experience, but also form their own opinions from knowing the experiences of other people within their community. So for calling 911, Ember, a 27-year-old trans woman, said, I consider calling law enforcement something of a last resort. If they're the only party from whom I'm able to obtain something that's important to me, I might consider it. But there are many cases I'd rather reach out to a community defense force maintained by volunteers. Meow says, it has to be a serious thing. I will call the police, but I don't feel 100% comfortable calling them because I know it could go bad. Pardon my language, because not every cop handles shit exactly the way they should, best for people. And Donatello, a 23-year-old trans man, described, but I probably wouldn't call them for like a noise complaint or anything really minor. I don't want to deal with police. Really, I don't want to have to go through the trouble of possibly explaining my gender identity and dealing with the paperwork for that to be really tiresome, especially because a lot of people I associate with and live with are transgender. And I do definitely feel that as a result, something violent happened to one of them. It might be, I feel like the police might enter it with, they brought it upon themselves for whatever reason. This hesitancy to call 911 is particularly interesting because these 3 folks, Emperor, Meow, and Donatello, did not have bad personal instances with police. Their actual, these opinions are formed out of not only their disclosure of knowing the realities of other people, of other trans folks dealing with police, but also their own research and information and sharing on social media and those sorts of things. When I asked them, how do you think police perceive trans folks? I handpicked some of these from, these are all from different people, and they represent the spectrum of seeing police as not perceiving trans people as any other person, and then seeing them as like mentally deranged or a disturbance. So again, mentally disturbed as an inconvenience. I think it's a weird mix. I can't really speak for other trans people, their experiences, because I just don't know. And then this one particular I want to point out, now a trans Black person, on the other hand, is a threat to their existence because, well, it's a Black person. So this is a participant acknowledging that not only are they trans, but also this intersectionality of race and how that can play into roles with difficulties with police departments. And again, this is a spectrum of experiences from people and their perceptions of police before they even, this is what they already have before they're even interacting with law enforcement. So in terms of furthering these perceptions of police, I wanted to bring this from Nicolas Cage. Yes, I did interview Nicolas Cage, just kidding. This is the pseudonym this particular participant picked. And I think this is really important to understand. Not only do a lot of my participants, especially in terms of their perceptions of law enforcement, they have this intricate intersectional knowledge of the many issues that pervade trans people moving throughout space, especially when law enforcement is present. So part of my language, I will read tidbits from this. If you could just see us as humans for even a split second, maybe they'd put the gun down. You know what I mean? Stop arresting sex workers, you know, because they're trying to make a living. Stop judging us on a perceived notion we're wrong, because there's nothing wrong with us. You know, and there was like a stop and frisk, you know, in New York. I feel that's how they perceive trans people. I'm gonna skip down. There are drug abusers and things like that. They need help. They don't need to be scared out of their, pardon my language, out of their fucking mind. You know, especially people of color, trans women. They're the most marginalized group. They don't deserve the shit that police do to them. And if police cared, the murders that happened would be solved, like that one in Texas. And I exchanged with him about this particular video. At the time we were interviewing in 2019, a trans woman had been brutally murdered she'd been beaten to death on a video, and because people had taken video and posted it to social media, they were able to actually find actually able to find these perpetrators. So, but his view is not unique. Nicholas's view of police perceiving trans folks and understanding
April, I'm sorry to interrupt. You have 2 minutes to go.
No problem. Understanding these intricate intersectionalities of race, class, you know, criminality, those sorts of things, with the rolled into the gender identity of police, lets them have informed decisions. Like it's just not an opinion. Like he knows about the sex trade and trans women of color. You know, he knows about these things that are happening. He's aware of this video that happened in Texas, although he did not know that the person personally who was murdered. He does have this understanding, and that's a lot of my participants are having these sorts of like awareness of institutional power as well, these intersecting issues. So what does this exactly mean? So in terms of the initial implications, it's very clear that police, even a couple not having cultural competency training, is leading to this ripple effect in communities, not only in their local community, but also throughout the whole, you know, that spreads throughout the United States as well as perceptions internationally. That was something else I found as well. We need to review current procedures about how law enforcement are interacting with trans folks. It's not good, and it's key, you know, even when there are institutions in place, when there's, you know, these protections in place, it's still these things are still happening through the cracks, right? And some accountability for targeted violence. Police in particular who commit crimes, transphobic based violence against these folks are not being held accountable. We've seen that with the calls for racial justice, and that really adds a dimension in terms of gender identity. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to end with future research needs to focus more on how these perceptions influence policy, as well as the existence of LGBTQ liaisons and training. And then my last slide is just to acknowledge that on Friday is TDOR, the Transgender Day of Remembrance. Thank you so much.
Thank you, April. I appreciate your work. If you would unshare your screen, we have a couple of minutes for Q&A. If any of the attendees or other panelists have any questions, they can type it into the Q&A box. There is one question here that came in earlier. I believe this was for Brittany. And the question was, is it time to bring back mental health institutions? In the context of your work and findings, I would. Yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the question, whomever that was. Please, no, let's not do that. So I just jotted down a couple things. The primary thing that needs to happen is we need to stop arresting for mental health related problems. We therefore need to improve training for police officers. So do not defund the police. This is a very complex issue, and I do think that it can be fixed, but nothing really quickly. But we need to improve and have more wide, some police departments already do this, but more training to identify mental illness. And we also need to provide additional training for community mental health centers as it relates, for those service providers, as it relates to criminal offending. So what we find is that, particularly in these interviews, it came across a lot that these new service providers come in and they have zero, they think that they're just meeting people with mental health issues. And that's it, that there's no money problems, that there's no family problems, that there's no substance abuse, that there's no criminal offending. So all of these things combined, which are very common, make for a difficult case. And if you have 100 people on your caseload and they all are that way, or even a decent proportion of them, it makes it really hard to provide that, that treatment. Another thing, there needs to be, and there's been a call for this since the inception of community mental health centers, there needs to be collaboration between the criminal justice system and the mental health system. It's disjointed. Nobody is, for the most part, they're not collaborating. The goals of the community mental health system are different than those from the criminal justice system. They don't see eye to eye. They don't see how they relate. These diversionary programs, such as mental health courts, drug courts, et cetera, they need to be more widely implemented. But as my research that I'm working on now shows, they're not racially, they're not accepting all races. And so we're only disproportionately incarcerating mentally ill individuals with, that are Black. We need funding for community mental health centers. That's been the problem since day one. They were promised funding that they were never given, and it's been decades and it's only more expensive. And so where's this money coming from? As well as there's almost no, like, treatment in drugs. Oh, sorry. Treatment in drugs. I've lost my mind. Treatment in jails is essentially non-existent across the United States. And so not providing treatment in jails for these lower level offenses increases the likelihood that they'll be later incarcerated in prison. And please stop canceling insurance when people are incarcerated, because lack of continuity of care increases later criminal offending. So it is a complex issue, but it would actually be cheaper to do all of these things than to re-implement these state mental health hospitals, which there could be lots of issues related to that. And there's only so many beds, and we already have money problems as it is. So fix what's there, let's not go back. That's my answer.
Thank you, Brittany. I'd like to take a moment to recognize all the panelists today. As you know, this is new, and we're you're part of the inaugural panel today, and we are very appreciative of your work, everyone's work, and these will be the videos of these are going to be uploaded to YouTube eventually, I believe by the end of the year. But we're out of time, unfortunately. Just one housekeeping note. The way that we've decided to set this up is we're going to be ending each panel for everyone at when I'm done. If you're attending the next panel on this stream, or if you are presenting in the next panel on the stream, you'll have to restart it again. You'll just have to click on the link at 9:55 is when I start again with the panelists. And then we broadcast at 10 o'clock for the next panel. So thank you to everyone. I appreciate you. I hope everyone's safe and healthy, and have a good day. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.